call the Environmental Advisory Board meeting to order for May 15th. The members of the Environmental Advisory Board were appointed by the City Council, and we serve voluntarily. The board's objective is to provide citizen insight to the City Council and staff on environmental activities within and affecting the City of Clearwater. Agendas of today's meeting are on the wall at the entrance to the chamber, I believe. Please remember to turn off your cell phones and electronic devices, and to ensure a complete record of the board's actions, we ask that anyone wishing to speak please state your name for the clerk. Will members of the board and staff please introduce yourselves? We have a few new members, so start to my left.
My name is Jason Drizzt.
My name is Michael Rubino.
I'm Jared Leone.
I'm Glenna Wentworth.
I'm Cassie Cordova.
Thank you very much. Our first order of business is to review and approve our minutes from our last meeting. Are there any changes or amendments to the minutes from anyone who?
Not me.
Okay.
Fine.
I'm looking for a motion. To
I move minutes be approved.
All right. I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. We do have another item before we get on to our citizens to be heard. We need to, because of changes with our board, we need to approve chair and vice chair to finish out the year. Our vice chair has resigned. I was going to nominate, and this sounds self-serving to nominate myself for chairman, but myself for chairman and Glenna as our vice chair. I will open up the motion to discussion. If anyone has any other changes, or if they accept that, we'll need a second. So,
I accept.
okay, all right, very well. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Okay, then Glenna, thank you. Welcome to vice chair,
Certainly, yeah.
and I'll be
The last
continue
one
to be
standing.
chair for our board then. All right, we'll move on to our next item then. It is citizens to be heard on items that are not on the agenda. If there's anyone to speak on anything that's not on the agenda, please come forward and state your name. And you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Beckman. For those of you that are new, I regularly provide an update here to the advisory board on solar. A lot going on in the city over the last few years that stems off of Greenprint, stems off of renewable energy goals that the city has, and that the city's been working to take action on. I look at solar permit data that the city has publicly available. Duke does not provide this kind of information to the public, so you have to go and look for it. But it is very interesting to see the trends for solar, which again contribute towards goals that are in Greenprint today. So some of the highlights for 2023, I didn't look at numbers for the first quarter of this year, but in 2023, there were over 330 new solar permits. That's about the same as what it was the previous year, and based upon prior years, it keeps on getting higher. That brings to a total of about 1,700 permits that were applied for. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything was installed, but that generally happens, and that's since 2015, is 1,700 permits. Out of all those installations, there's a total estimated about 19 kilowatts of power. Megawatts of power, sorry. That's equivalent to about 8.5% of the nameplate capacity that's on one of the power plants that's in St. Pete, the Bayboro plant, about 8.5% of nameplate capacity. So it's sizable. The total estimated savings that people get, that includes the city, by the way, but combined together, it's about $3.3 million a year saved. That's also equivalent to about 42 million pounds of carbon dioxide, which is also equivalent to about 2.3 million gallons of gasoline per year. That other figure was per year, and about 750,000 trees planted per year, which again goes towards Greenprint goals. Very important. Other highlights in 2023 are nonprofits, churches, and governmental entities getting the new ability to take a 30% tax credit. I won't go into more details there. I know that Cassidy is chasing those things down for the city. One other thing that's unique for this year or last year is a carport that was installed at Serena by the Sea. So that's the second carport in the city. The other one is at the Clearwater Aquarium. Okay, so that's just information on solar.
Thank you very much, Brian. Are there any other citizens to speak on items that are not on the agenda? Thank you. Please state your name for the clerk, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Beckman. I am a Clearwater resident. I also served on the council from 2020 through 2024, March of 24. And so I'm here today speaking as a resident, former council member. I want to thank you for serving on this very important board. I really appreciate the work that you do and that the board has done over the last 4 years. I wanted to offer a couple of observations I had as a council member. First off, you should understand that as a council member, council members are not allowed to come and speak to you as a board. We're not supposed to be representing the whole council, and so that was a little limiting. Certainly, I could meet with you individually, and a number of people on the environmental board were my friends as well. I've been a lifelong environmentalist. I would encourage you to reach out to the council members and introduce yourself, especially our 2 new members. Introduce yourself, sit down with them, tell them what you care about the environment, what your background is, what your passion is. It's really important for them to know and respect you and your expertise. And along with that, I would suggest that you make reports or recommendations to the council much more frequently than once a year. We need to hear from you. I have been the strongest voice on the council for environmental concerns. I needed help all the time. I need you all to stand up and make statements and make recommendations. I mean, that council does. I did. I needed it. And I think if we want to see positive change and strong adherence to Greenprint 2.0, that council needs to hear it from this board that has a stellar reputation. So I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to get to know Greenprint 2.0. That's like your Bible, and you need to advocate for those things. I would encourage you to do some research on how different cities, municipalities nationwide are realizing those types of goals. One of the goals we have in Greenprint 2.0 that I really love and don't want to see diluted in any way is to have solar put on the homes of 1,000 low and moderate income residents in Clearwater. How are we going to do that? What's the procedure? All that nuance hasn't really been worked out yet. We've got to do that. I would also encourage you to speak up about council items that relate to the environment or relate to saving money. I had a mentor that said on almost every council agenda, there are opportunities to save money and make wise decisions about energy efficiencies, about incentivizing, and about when we hand out grants for redevelopment or development or improvement in Clearwater, we need to have stipulations that they will follow Greenprint goals or best practices for environmental stewardship. That might mean you have to build to platinum LEED certification or something like that. I would also say investigate artificial turf. It's going to be coming before you. It's a dicey subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And just briefly, yes, I will say that I agree. We try to make reports and recommendations more frequently. I know we have our yearly report to council, and in addition to that, we do try to bring forward a number of initiatives throughout the year. Sometimes that is a challenge between meeting and frequency and other things like that. And I agree, Greenprint 2.0, I think Cassie had said at our previous meeting that we're looking at a Greenprint 3.0, so we want to make sure that some of the things, some of those expectations and goals are going to show up from 2 to 3. So thank you very much. Are there any other citizens to be heard about items that are not on the agenda? Please come forward, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm Bill Johnson, 2694 Redford Court West in Clearwater. There are a lot of good things that are happening environmentally in the area. We had a great Arbor Day tree giveaway in Clearwater. The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council had a good resiliency conference last week. The city went from a 6 to a 5 for their community rating system. And oyster mats are being made by volunteers and installed along the Courtney Campbell. I have a flyer for that. But there's one area of concern that I'd like to share with you, and that's regarding the medians that are landscaped on our 19 and Gulf to Bay. And we have a strategic plan objective, which is to protect and conserve our urban forests and public green spaces to promote biodiversity and reduce our carbon footprint. And occasionally they get real cluttered with trash and litter. And I complained about this, and so they were cleaned up. But when they were cleaned up, the understory plants, as shown in this view, were all removed. The understory plants in this view were removed. The understory plants in this view were removed. These are along 19 at Drew Street. And now Gulf to Bay used to look more like this, but after a while it got looking like this and like this. Now Gulf to Bay has been renovated. It's been converted to sod and very small plants, although some of those small plants have not survived. I think we can look almost as good as Largo. Largo has invested in their medians. This is strategic importance for their city. 3 different views of Largo. We have some good medians, Harn, this at Drew Street near the East Library. We can do it. And I'm asking you to recommend that the city implement a sufficient budget to live up to our motto that we have, which is bright and beautiful from the bay to the beach. I would report that the Parks and Rec director informed me at the Strategic Planning Council, or Strategic Planning Workshop last week, that he understands the message that came from the City Council that we should do better, and I would suggest that you might encourage that.
Thank you, Bill. I agree. Those
Can we
photos.
ask questions?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree that we can do better. I wonder if there might be an opportunity to look at an overarching kind of goal for what we want for the medians and better plants or things that make more sense for less maintenance to keep the medians looking good, but also balance, having aesthetic, a pleasing aesthetic look. So yeah, Glenna?
Yeah, so I was wondering if there, is there irrigation on those, medians? Is there a sprinkler system? Because what I've found in my neighborhood is if plants are not getting water, they don't live. And some plants are, not, they're drought resistant also that are planted, but either way, if there's no irrigation, sometimes that's the issue.
If I may respond?
Yes, please.
The medians along Gulf Bay have irrigation.
They do.
The plantings at the intersection of Drew and 19 do not. However, for about 25 years, they were maintained using natural plantings. And so can't explain that. I do know that Largo's medians do not have irrigation. They have a water truck that they use periodically. They have a team of 4 people that they brought back into the city. It previously had been handled by outside contractors. They brought them back so that they could actually control the quality of the effort, and that included utilizing this water truck. So
Okay.
I can't explain about the one on Drew Street. I don't believe it has irrigation, but it seems to be surviving very nicely.
Yeah.
Sounds like there are a lot of options.
Yeah, and I think if we could look at more drought-tolerant plants or best practices, because I recognize that there's other parts along county roads that they've invested in medians as well, along like Clearwater Largo Road and other parts of our community that the medians are taken care of or have been put together, and they're maintained, and it's at a low level in terms of
Right.
the cost.
Safety Harbor, Oldsmar
Yeah.
do have medians that look pretty good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for bringing this up, Bill. And if this is something we can maybe discuss at a future meeting, how we can look at our medians and best practices in other nearby communities and how we can support improving our medians in our community.
Put it on the list.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Cassie. Is there anyone else here to speak about anything that's not on our agenda? Please come forward. All right, we'll move on to our next item then. New business, review solar development code updates. And Kyle, thank you. Please come down.
Good afternoon, Kyle Brotherton with our Planning and Development Department. Here to present today kind of an update on some of our development code amendments that we're working on. The most specific one here today would be solar energy systems. So we did also propose electric vehicle parking standards. However, during our last legislative session, legislators passed a bill that actually preempted electric vehicle parking to the state. So we had to pull those standards out at kind of the last minute. So I do have a presentation for you here today. So just a quick agenda, touch briefly on what the Community Development Code is, what it does. We'll work into our solar energy systems, which we're proposing, the process of the adoption and where we're at, and then I'll save time at the end for any questions that you may have. So what is the Community Development Code? The city's Community Development Code is really a legal tool that establishes development standards within the city. And this code actually helps implement policies found within the comprehensive plan, which is Clearwater 2045, which was recently adopted, as well as Greenprint 2.0. So some of the development standards that are established in the development code can be setbacks, height, parking standards, or landscaping standards. And since conditions do change in the city over time, this document is a living document, so we bring forward amendments from time to time. So solar energy systems, this is sort of a catch-all term that we're defining. It's really any system that converts the sun's light into electricity or thermal energy. And really, for all intents and purposes, this relates to photovoltaic panels. What we're proposing within these amendments are to create standards for roof-mounted systems and floating solar systems, I'm sorry. So for roof-mounted, the standards would apply to both pitched roofs and flat roofs. The image you see there is on a pitched roof, but generally the panels would need to be parallel to the roof line. They could extend no greater than 12 inches above the roof line, and as you can see, they would need to be installed in their horizontal configuration. For flat roofs, again, similarly, these would have to be installed in their horizontal position. For this, we're proposing a height no greater than 5 feet, and that would be from the top of the panel to the roof deck. And that would be at maximum tilt angle, which in the city is about 25 degrees, and that allows for maximum yield from sun to energy. And then we're also proposing to have these be located away from the edge of the roof to really minimize the visibility from the streets.
How far away?
We don't have it defined.
Okay.
It's just, from the street, and then obviously our fire codes and building codes would apply to that as well.
Okay.
Next one is floating solar or photovoltaics. These are now actually required through state statutes, and these were put into House Bill 1411 from 2022. And it really requires that floating solar be a required or a permitted use in certain land uses. So these are going to be typically found on larger bodies of water that have little to no wave action. Think of a quarry or a reservoir. However, there are a large number of stormwater ponds in the city that have little to no wave action that these could be installed in, albeit a lot smaller scale. So for this, we're proposing just a couple of standards. Upon application, we would need a certified engineer to provide a statement that basically says the installation of a floating solar system would not cause degradation to the water body for which it's located on, and will not cause any negative impacts to the biological community within that pond. And then for these, throughout the research we've done, they're typically parallel to the water body itself, so we're proposing a height of 3 feet above the water surface. So the process of adoption, we were hoping to present this to you prior to our Community Development Board meeting. However, that one did get canceled. So the Community Development Board, we presented this set of amendments along with the overall ordinance at the April 16th hearing. And the board did not have any questions or concerns related to the solar provisions provided. And they unanimously recommended approval to City Council. So that brings us to this week. On Monday, we held work session and we presented the overall ordinance. And again, the council did not have any questions or concerns related to the solar energy systems. So this will actually go to the City Council meeting tomorrow night for first hearing. Provided everything goes well and it gets voted to be approved, we would have the adoption hearing or second hearing on June 6th. Any sort of code amendment becomes effective upon adoption, so realistically the first day that these would be truly implemented and effective would be June 7th. And then with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Kyle. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, why 3 feet above the water surface?
So all the research that we did, like I said, most of the panels in these floating configurations were pretty much parallel to the water surface. And since our bodies of water here in the city are a lot smaller and typically abut up to some sort of residential neighborhood, since they serve the stormwater for that development, we didn't want it to be too intrusive for those neighbors as they're sitting in their backyard enjoying. So it's really just kind of keep the impacts minimal on a visual standpoint.
Do we have standards now? Are these replacing standards, or we do not have standards?
So we do not have standards currently, so these would be new.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
Is there concern about the vegetation and maintenance on these panels? So, 3 feet above the water still allows a decent amount of light to get in around the panels. I know some of the stormwater ponds I've inspected have a decent amount of vegetation growing around them. How would maintenance be affected by having these panels in these ponds?
Yeah, so that would be something that we'd review. Obviously, this is brand new to us. We haven't noticed very many examples during our research that would be on, a vegetated pond. So, it's probably going to be an instance where we have to learn as we go. But really that statement that would be required by our certified engineer, that's kind of how we would get at ensuring that that vegetative, whatever it might be, material is not affected in any negative way. And so, ideally, I don't think, if an entity was installing it, they would install it over the vegetation. They would try and find, an open spot of water where that vegetation isn't sticking up over the water or, yeah.
I'm thinking St. Pete, or the waste to energy plant. They have a body of water there. I think they were considering doing this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure what St. Pete's doing. A lot of our research, I think we might be one of the first local municipalities to actually adopt these, even though they're required by state statute. We'd want to make sure we had something on the books in case we do happen to get an installation. I know from other research we saw at Orlando International Airport, they had some of these smaller stormwater ponds and they had some smaller scale installations installed on those. So that's kind of, I think, what we were anticipating if we do see any.
I'm curious if we had no standards previously, and I've heard, and Glenna might be able to speak to this because she has solar at her house, but the process that homeowners have come against is that permitting takes a long time, longer than maybe it should. Is this going to help smooth that process, or is this going to make that process more challenging?
So we were hoping that this kind of smooths that process, makes it a little bit quicker. We didn't have any standards to kind of review against beforehand. So now that we have it in the code, whoever's inspecting the permit that comes through can say, okay, A, B, and C of these met, these are good. And then obviously fire has their certain codes that they would have to review against. I do believe there's some spacing requirements depending on how big, the system is in total. Then obviously the building code would apply as well.
Okay. So overall, this will be helpful.
They were
in that
hoping to make it a
process.
lot more of a smoother process and bring consistency through, future
Certainly.
installations, yeah.
Okay, great. Are there any other comments or questions from the board? I'll open it up to the audience if they'd like to come up. And please, you'll have 3 minutes. Please state your name for the clerk, and you'll have 3 minutes to talk on this item. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Tater. I live over on North Beach. I have a question. I've had a little experience as a charter captain on Cuba Lake in Ithaca area. The amount of water that you're talking about here, I'm not sure, but when you take away the sun, you immediately take away the undergrowth. We had zebra mussels, which did the opposite. The plants were growing way out. And the other question is the temperature of the water. When you take the sun off the water, the likelihood of the water cooling, unless you have another source of heat, would also have an effect upon the biological aspects of that particular body of water. So that would be something I think the research needs to certainly be done on, because that could have an adverse effect or it could have a positive. For the fishermen, they love to fish underneath, they're happy. But for the whole total environmental issue, I think that water temperature would become an issue that you want to kind of keep an eye on.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think where Kyle was talking about were stormwater ponds and lakes that aren't really fishable. And I think some of the concerns would be valid in terms of how it would block out and create growth around them, though. That could be a sizable concern because of the change in the ecology. So certainly I think that's something that we touched on, but yeah. Did you want to make any?
Yeah, I also, my other small concern about the vegetation as well was there's a certain amount of nutrient uptake with the vegetation, and as you reduce the amount of vegetation in these stormwater ponds, you increase the amount of nutrients that could flow beyond the pond and into the waterways at the outfalls. So it is a concern of mine is, are we affecting water quality beyond the stormwater ponds if we install these systems?
Yeah, I think it's some interesting unintended consequences that could come up. Thank you for bringing up those item, or the idea there. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this item? Please come forward and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hi again, Brian Beckman. My question pertains to one of the examples that I outlined earlier with carport solar. So I wasn't sure in what Kyle presented or how carports applied. I'm looking at the picture that I took actually today of that solar carport that I mentioned. And it looks like the panels go right up to or over the edge of the carport. Not exactly sure because I didn't go
Are you
right
able
up
to
there
put
to
the
them.
photo underneath there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's just on my
Oh,
phone.
yeah.
So you can see there, I'll just bring that up there, the solar panels are right
Yeah.
on top, and it looks like they kind of go over the edge. They don't have the room like up on our roofs. It is 3 feet, to my knowledge, that you've got to give from a fire perspective. But anyway, I wasn't sure how either one of those, I guess the first one that was mentioned from a rooftop perspective applies to carports, but might want to make sure that that is included in some way.
Or if it's retroactive.
Kyle, can you talk to how the standards would apply to carports or in these specific instances if other people wanted to do a similar project?
Yeah, so as we kind of envision this, anything on a roof, so carport would be included, a garage would be included, or there might be even some instances where it might be, placed on a gazebo. I know we have structures in Coachman Park, the picnic shelters. I mean, it has a roof, so we would, allow it to be installed on that.
So those specific examples would not have passed these new standards then, possibly, because it sounds like they go right to the edge of the roof?
So they can go to the edge of the roof.
Okay.
So if it's pitched, it can go to the edge. What we're concerned with more is the height above the actual pitch of the roof.
And on flat roofs, like the carport?
And then flat roofs, I'd have to take a look at the image, but flat roof, it would have to be the 5 feet at maximum tilt angle. That's the maximum that would be permitted.
Okay, yeah, because it didn't look like those were at a 5 foot.
Yeah, no, from the image, it looked like they'd be A-okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Please come forward and state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Kathleen Beckman. Again, the thing that caught my eye or ear when Kyle was presenting, and maybe he can explain a little more, is I'm okay, I think it's reasonable, it's certainly legal to have solar panels put wherever the fire code says they need to be put. But if there's any consideration of aesthetics, like we're going to limit the number of solar panels because we don't want to see them, I think that was on one of the slides, like it didn't want to be visible from the street or something. I don't think that's good policy. It's not about visual, it's about someone maximizing their solar output to match their home. And, you know, again, you can imagine maybe a worst-case scenario as, you know, I want them 6 feet up or 8 feet up, or I don't want to see them at all. We had that in our condo or our townhome. You know, they only wanted them on one side of the street, which doesn't seem fair to, you know, people who happen to live on that side of the street. So I would, you know, caution that. I don't know if there's further explanation about what that means, but I don't think aesthetics need to be. Fire code, sure, but aesthetics, no. And again, think about what your feedback is, and are you going to give that feedback to the council, and when? Because it needs to be usable. Whatever you guys are thinking, if you want to comment on this policy, do it when it's usable. So by the first or second reading, and I think it was May 16th is this
Tomorrow.
Thursday, and then June 6th is the second reading. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Yeah, I think too there are some properties that the solar has to go in a certain way, and that may be restrictive based on these standards. Kyle, can you speak to that? The question that Kathleen had brought up in terms of balancing, I guess, because, yeah, I had read that in there too, but I thought that it was kind of lower as far as aesthetics being a reason to not allow it, but can you speak to that?
Yeah, so when we were going through, I don't think we necessarily considered aesthetics for PV panels. Obviously, you see them on pitched roofs now. We don't really have an issue with that. From a lot of the research that we did, other communities also had theirs on flat roof setback because, you know, sometimes there's not going to be a parapet wall that hides that. And currently, we also have in our code standards that would hide, we use that term kind of loosely, any mechanical equipment that would be on the roof as well. So whether it be AC units, HVAC, things of that nature. So this kind of follows in line with what we currently have in our code. But we do have, I'll pull this out here. So we do have a little bit of a phrase. 1A2. So we have the line that says technically feasible. So if, you know, an entity comes in to install this on a flat roof, you know, they provide the documentation that says, oh, that's okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so if they provide the documentation at the time of application that says, you know, due to the location of the building, location of the sun, and typically it's, you know, facing south or west, that's where the sun's rays are strongest. If they provide that information that says we need it, you know, as close to the roof edge as possible, we would approve that.
So, you know, because that's where I noticed to minimize visibility. It feels like there's flexibility in that wording, but like to ensure that there's flexibility so people aren't coming forward and then not being approved for a project just because of that visibility issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, is there? I don't know if there's any other improvement to that wording, or if that serves as flexibility if people did have those concerns.
Yeah, so this was drafted based off of St. Pete's language, actually. I do remember that we looked at St. Pete as an example. Other communities were a lot more specific than this. You know, it had to be 5 feet from the roof edge. Depending on certain buildings, that would, you know, limit greatly where they could put this and, you know, the amount needed to really make the investment worthwhile. So we went with a little bit more flexibility in language, a little bit more vague, you know, for that matter. That way it gives the applicant some flexibility when they submit, and it gives our staff some flexibility in taking a look at that and determining it.
So the CDB would make exceptions when it's not technically feasible to abide by this code?
So this approval process would actually not go before the development board. This would be a staff level approval. Is how we have it listed now. So any sort of documentation, we're not experts in, you know, all things solar. If, you know, the applicant would ideally know the ins and the outs of how a solar system works and where it needs to be located. So if they could provide that technical documentation at time of application, staff would go with their word.
So the solar company would probably be the one to do that.
Correct, yeah, the installation company
Right.
or the solar company.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kyle.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Anyone else to talk on this issue? Comment? All right. Hearing none.
I just want to say that, so oftentimes we look to Orlando, and I had heard, a year or so ago that Orlando was was installing photovoltaic panels and bodies of water. So it would be interesting to just, I'm sure they're doing water studies to see what the effects are
Yeah.
on nutrient, flow and stuff like that. I'm sure there's some research that'd be interesting that.
I see
To-
Cassie's already writing this down on her notes.
It's on the list.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, Glenn, maybe figuring out some possible locations throughout the city, like you said, some stormwater ponds and other places where this could be feasible. That would be maybe something we can look at our next meeting or in a next meeting, something like that. So, all right. Any other comments, questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next item then. Review presentation on duck hunting near Cooper's Bayou. Thank you very much. And we have our Chief of Police, Chief Gandy. Thank you for coming and joining us today. Come on down. And just briefly before the chief gives our presentation, I had found out at a neighborhood association meeting that duck hunting is allowed in a certain portion in the city near Cooper's Bayou. Cooper's Bayou's been an area that we have talked about meeting after meeting. The city purchased this property quite a few years ago, spent many millions of dollars on this beautiful piece of property, and I was kind of surprised to learn that this activity is allowed near there. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Leone. Thank you. Appreciate what you guys do. And I just want to speak a little bit of our historic experience with duck hunting in Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay, and Upper Tampa Bay. It's been going on as long as I can remember. I've lived here my whole life, and over when I grew up in Tampa, certainly it was taking place around the Spoil Islands back in the 80s. And ultimately, the popularity increased maybe a decade or so ago, and we started getting additional complaints along Old Tampa Bay or Upper Tampa Bay, and on the area along Haines Bayshore, the mangrove area west of the Bayside Bridge. And the media even covered this extensively back then. And effectively, what occurred is those are public bodies of water, and that is, hunting in those areas is under the jurisdiction of the state of Florida, and FWC handles, the hunting enforcement issues. We get the calls every duck hunting season, which is around January, as does the sheriff's office, as does St. Petersburg Police Department. Anyone who borders the mangrove shoreline in those areas gets the calls and complaints. As a matter of fact, I only know that it's duck hunting season when I go running on Bayshore and I can hear the gunfire myself. I was coming across the Bayside Bridge this year, and I saw a boat anchored out by the wastewater treatment plant in that area with a bunch of decoys set out. So this isn't unprecedented. It's been going on a long time. I just think there's been an expansion. I've even seen some ads for commercial guided trips to these areas. Where Cooper's Bayou comes in, I think perhaps it was newly discovered. A newly discovered location, or someone started identifying it as a productive place to hunt ducks. So the calls increased to the police department, to the sheriff's office, with folks looking for anyone to make this stop effectively. And the response obviously was the initial first flush was it's legal. It's a public body of water. It's navigable water. You can get in there with a shallow draft boat or a canoe at the proper tides. And as such, FWC views that as a public body of water that can be hunted in. I saw a flurry of emails back and forth and a lot of information and unfortunately some misinformation. And I don't think it was intentional, but people were taking specific pieces of conversations and or responses and applying them too broadly. So we spent some time, our legal advisors here, Melissa Isbell, and we spent quite a bit of time reinventing the wheel, so to speak. I have some contacts in Tallahassee. I reached out. Melissa reached out to legal with FWC. We looked at this thing, and you know, quite frankly, there are restrictions if it's in a park. So that was the first inclination from many members of the public. Well, this is a park. It's a preservation area, ergo, no duck hunting. So I'm merely the enforcement arm. And ultimately, I'm agnostic as to whether it's good, bad. I'm indifferent to it, but I understand the citizens' complaint with gunfire in proximity to their backyards. It's legal as long as they're shooting away from the homes. They're not shooting over right-of-ways, paved roads, or residences. They're shooting out towards the open body of water. So when I looked at this thing, I was curious because the city advertises this on our website effectively as Cooper's Bayou Preservation Area. That's the about 300 or so acres, and it's mangrove swamp, mangrove shoreline, and some submerged bodies of water there. And then we have Cooper's Bayou Park, which is accessible off Bayshore. Again, a small swath of mangroves and, you know, a kayak launch, a small pond, and so on. So that's the area that this is occurring, but it is in the public waterway. So therein lies the problem with enforcement. It's not enforceable under these circumstances. So, you know, Parks was of the position that it's a preservation area, it's a park. As you mentioned, we acquired this, so I started digging into it. And I'll put this up here to show you what I found, which presents the problems that we're dealing with. So that's parcel number 1, city-owned property. So let me show you the perimeter of this thing. It goes out to here. And this is Cooper's Bayou Park. And then this whole thing is the so-called preservation area. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because it's city property, but it's zoned commercial. So that was my first kind of thing that jumped out at me as a bit problematic for any kind of enforcement perspective. And then secondarily, you have this parcel. The county's the primary owner, with the city as the secondary owner, and it's zoned raw acreage. Again, not a park or preservation area. And then finally, in the midst of all this, you have a private parcel of submerged land. So certainly private property adds a whole other dimension to this within the confines of what we believe to be a preservation area or park. Legally speaking, if you have permission, the property owner, you can hunt on their property. So this is a bit of a pretzel. At the conclusion, Melissa and I discussed it at length, and she's also the legal advisor for Parks and Rec. And again, I'm agnostic. I'll enforce whatever is given to us. But at this point, the onus is on Parks and Rec to I think, reconcile the zoning, reconcile the ownership, or get an MOU with the county if they want to try and restrict this, properly post the perimeter once it's all done with the park rules, restrictions, no hunting like all our other parks, and coordinate with FWC. Then we could reach back out to them. Melissa would be able to touch base with them and say, hey, it's now designated as a park, and as such our ordinances would apply. What's your legal opinion now that it is truly classified as a park? Here's the border, here's the legal description, and we've reconciled the land, I don't want to say disputes, there's no disputes, but the land inconsistencies with a park. Yeah. So that's where I left it. The other challenge is enforcement. I don't have a vessel that can get in there. I think it would be an issue that we could address if that's the decision Parks pursues through education, and just say, you can't do it in here, but you move east 100 yards to the other side of the peninsula, and it's fair game. It moves it out of that confined bayou area But again, the residents will still hear it. I mean, it's still there, and it would be perfectly legal there. So again, I don't really have an opinion in the matter other than to present to you the enforcement problem we have. Certainly, if it were a park and included as a park, we could enforce in there. And I can strike MOUs with FWC and things like that to work with them and do a hunter education program, because these hunters are responsible. They don't want to do something they're not supposed to do. And, you know, if it's off limits because it is a park or a sanctuary or something like that, then you know, that I don't see an issue there once we educate folks that are using that area. But, you know, I'll answer any questions that I can. Hopefully that kind of gave you enough to at least speak to the public and have the public understand what we're dealing with, because a lot of information flew around wildly in the midst of all this. And again, I get it. I can hear it when I'm running. I can hear it from my house. So I can imagine if you lived in the condos right up against there, or any homes right along Bayshore, and, you know, it's going on, it would be concerning.
Yeah. I appreciate your time today, Chief, and I think this is exactly what, I know this is what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for opinions, I was looking for fact and where we are, and it is quite a pretzel, a lot of knots to untie, to start figuring out how to move forward with a process like this, and it sounds like Parks and Rec might be the first step in
Sure.
kind of moving forward, is getting the proper zoning for that area, and then kind of, yeah, looking at this again and figuring out what can be done. And no, I do appreciate giving us the information. I think a lot of people too were just kind of surprised that in such a built-out area you would have something like, you know, this activity happening, considering how built out Pinellas County is. So,
Sure.
Does anyone on the board have any questions or comments for the chief?
Yeah, I heard about it too. Just apparently early Christmas morning, people were woken up by gunshots, and
Yeah.
it was very disconcerting. And they went out and looked. You know, so I was hearing that over the Christmas holidays about that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that it should be a preservation area would be zoned commercial. I mean, the zoning seems odd.
Well, that's the first thing that jumped out at me when all this came up. I'm like, well, let me look at it, because we if you go to our website, we call it a preservation area, but then I look at it and 150 acres or so is commercial. I'm like, well, now we have a problem, because we can't anoint it with that. And the other thing is, it's got to be properly marked and signed with the restrictions on all those things. And then I think we have a good chance, if that's the direction that Parks wants to go, with, you know, FWC recognizing it as a preservation area or park. So again, you know, I'll react to whatever the circumstances, you know, that unfold. But again, I think beginning of January, end of December is generally when this starts up again. So we have, you know, some time to either educate the residents more effectively along the area. But I've done all I can. My staff has reiterated this over, but you know, there's folks that don't want to take the answer for an answer, and I understand that. If I lived right next to it, I would probably be irked at, you know, dawn when this is going on too. So I get it, but you know, we'll react to whatever Parks ends up doing.
Yeah, and I think maybe there is an opportunity for an education campaign the city can send out, in, you know, the utility bill or something, like you said, in the later part of the year when duck hunting season is for this area. But we've talked a number of times about Cooper's Bayou and that space, and we've gone out there years ago. We went out there and toured the area, and it is, you need to call ahead for Parks to get out there to access the property. It is not like other parks throughout the city, but I think some of that was because the city purchased it to make it a park, and it's just kind of in that kind of languishing at this point. But Cassie, we've talked, I think there's a master plan process or in the works, and maybe we can find out where the zoning process is, and if that's something that can be moved up ahead of any other planning for that space. And
If I may.
yes, if you can,
Well,
please
I'm-
answer
I'm-
this. Please.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
go ahead.
I'm the legal advisor for Parks as well,
Thank
so
you.
I'm aware of some of the activity that's been going on. So There is a future land use plan for this area that is to designate it properly as a park or a preserve. That just had never been moved forward since the acquiring of the land itself. It's my understanding that now that since it has come to their awareness, that they are going to go through the process to get it zoned properly. At that point, there will likely be other hurdles. Just because it's immediately zoned that way doesn't mean that it's automatically going to prohibit duck hunting there, and it still may not even be an option based on our interactions with FWC and a few other legal issues that I think Jared's actually going to speak with you all about later. But my understanding is Parks is actively pursuing the proper zoning designation as we speak for this. I have no idea how long that process is, though, in candor to all of you. So I know it's in progress. I don't know when that progress will be completed.
Okay, thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it. Is there any other comments from the board? Any comments from the audience? Please come forward and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hi again, Brian Beckman. Yeah, it's just simply to encourage you to lend your voice as an advisory board to designating that property as I heard it, described. I think, I know I was surprised hearing that, just big surprise that it wouldn't be RV zoned that way. So lending your voice. I don't know when I heard that Parks Department was pursuing that, to what extent the Parks Advisory Board, was supporting and pursuing that, but having this advisory board lend their voice, that would, I'm sure, mean something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Anyone else like to comment on this item? Please come forward. Thank you.
Kathleen Beckman again. I would just reiterate that and just say positive, persistent pressure. Those kinds of answers are great. It's in Parks and Recs and it's moving forward. You need to have answers and updates regularly so things don't fall through the cracks. And I give a lot of grace to our staff. We have wonderful staff in the city. We are understaffed quite a bit in a lot of those key departments, but that doesn't mean we just let it go. It means we continue to beat the drum. Where are we with changing that zoning out of commercial? And just let people know you're watching. Otherwise, things get put on the back burner, and then something happens along the lines, and it's like, wow, we should have changed that zoning when we had an opportunity. Just saying.
Thank you very much. Any other comments?
When is duck season? Is it January, February?
Yeah, it runs through January. So it's like
December
through January. It varies,
Okay.
but that's about the time frame.
I know, I kayak, I've kayaked in that area, and you kayak right through that land. There's a path right through the bridge, the land bridge there, into the open water. And so, the thought that there might be, of course, I don't know, January is probably not my favorite kayaking time, but still, just to think there could be people out there on the water kayaking, and it's recreational. It's a recreational area.
All right. Any other? Oh, yeah.
No, that's certainly and part of the hunting legislation and part of the rules say they have to be responsible and careful, and they can't shoot in your direction if you're there, right? So as long as they're hunting responsibly, as I think the way it's written, then they're okay. And I think that's the conflict point here, that if it's a park and multiple people are using it, then that could be a problem. You come around paddling around a bunch of mangroves and there's hunters over there. But the onus obviously is on them to be prudent and careful and mindful of the surroundings.
All right.
Thank you very much, Chief.
I also thought Sarah Kessler was talking about in engineering that she's in.
Yeah, I think she spoke at our last meeting about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go over the topics during the director's report.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments from the audience on this topic? Or we'll move on to our next. It's review preemption issues for shark fishing and phosphogypsum bans. Thank you for coming down. Jared?
Hi. Mr. Chair, appreciate it. Jared Simpson, I'm with the City Attorney's Office, and I was invited by Cassie to come and speak to a couple of issues that apparently are of interest to the board. And so first, I guess I'll start with the phosphogypsum because I think that's going to be a little bit easier. I believe that what prompted the discussion here was the bill that came through the legislature last year. And I think there may have been some misunderstanding exactly what that did in the media and some of that conversation around that. So I did take a look at that, and I'll try to clarify just, I think what is of most concern to the board, and hopefully this resolves that, is this is the bill analysis and fiscal impact statement for that bill that I was able to pull. And this is most of the things that come through the legislature. There will be a committee, a staff report, and those things are very helpful for you to get kind of an idea of what it is that exactly that they're trying to do. This report lays out that the EPA actually prohibits the use of phosphogypsum in road construction in any way, really. They treat it as a waste product, and so it has to be handled under the regulations for waste products, and specifically gypsum stacks are highly regulated, how they're constructed, managed, all that. And so, but just kind of cut to the chase here. And you can see here in October of 2020, the EPA actually approved a request to allow a limited use of phosphogypsum in government road construction projects, but then subsequently they withdrew that the following year. And part of their statement was that the request did not contain all of the required information in order for them to make the change to their rules. And so I think the industry responded, and the Fertilizer Institute is an industry lobbying and research group. They responded by coming to Florida, getting FDOT and getting this bill, and essentially I think the idea is that FDOT would then study this, and then they would go back to the EPA to try to revisit this question again. But as you can see, I highlighted what's I think most important to this board is that phosphogypsum remains prohibited under the EPA rules for road construction projects. Now, I had raised to Cassie that ultimately, if the EPA decides to go back and reverse course again and allow this, and then FDOT ultimately in their study concludes that it's feasible and it's not going to harm the environment or whatever they end up concluding, the city won't have any ability to control how FDOT, what the materials that they use in their road construction projects. So we'd be preempted in that scenario. And same with county roads as well. There may be some room for our own contracts and construction, but that would be something that we'd have to take a very close look at. I don't know how it would impact the costs of those things. And obviously that would be further down the line because it's not even an available material at this point in time. So I don't know if that answers the question on that, but that's what I have.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I had brought this before the board from people in the community, not because of anything at the legislature, but because at that time it was being tested by a private company. Mosaic was testing this product, and at that time there was a pushback from community that felt that the testing of this product meant there was feasibility in the future for use of this product. And that's where we had tried to develop an ordinance to kind of prohibit the use, because our city already has ordinances that prohibit certain materials in road construction within the city. And so we wanted to include this as one of those materials as well. And so that's where I think the board came from with this. It wasn't because of, and then later on in the year, the legislature took this up after a lot of back and forth when Mosaic was testing it, and then they, but I had found that this was, and that's where it was confusing for me, was that the EPA had it banned, but then there was an allowable use within our state, and so that's where there was concern from this board.
So I haven't independently looked into the rules that this, you can see at the bottom that whoever drafted this report for the committee, they cited to the rules and everything. I haven't independently looked into the rules to see if I agree with the report or anything, but But I mean, you can see that they've taken a pretty clear position here that they don't think that it's allowed in road construction projects under the current regulatory regime. So that's my report on that. And I guess just to kind of give you, because this was titled on the agenda as the preemption, so I did want to take an opportunity to sort of give you some information there. I know a lot of things come through, and people have ideas and things that they want to accomplish for the city, and then it comes to legal, and then we have to, put the stop to it, and a lot of times people don't understand, and they blame the lawyers, and so that's fine. It comes with the territory, but I've hoped that maybe I could explain a few things so that you could kind of understand where we're coming from when we review something. We're not trying to get in the way. We're just trying to make sure that whatever it is that we do, we can defend it and not have to write a check to someone who, on the other side of what we're trying to do. So I first wanted to start with that because in some of the conversation that I had seen, there appeared to be a little bit of a confusion between what an ordinance and what a resolution is. And so if you look at the statute, there's a definition for those. And when it comes to an ordinance, that's something that's going to be enforceable. I think that's really the main difference there, is that if we're going to punish someone for something, fine them or subject them to code enforcement or police being detained or sent to court for some reason, then it would have to be in an ordinance. Resolutions are typically, a lot of jurisdictions will use resolutions to adopt fee structures or kind of conduct the administrative business of government, but things that are enforced or prohibited in the city are typically done by ordinance. So that's the key difference there. If the board or if the city council, for example, wanted to make take a policy position or express their disapproval of something that was going on, that would be done by a resolution. If the council wanted to prohibit activity and subject someone to potential fine or even incarceration or something like that, it would have to be done by means of an ordinance. Resolutions get read once, ordinances get read twice, and they have to be advertised. But apart from that, that's the key difference. So the other part to that is if the city wants, we can pretty much adopt a resolution on anything, whether we're preempted or not, because it doesn't have that, it doesn't put anyone under threat of prosecution. So that's a key distinction there. Preemption issues are less of a concern for resolutions. The second part is on preemption. What is preemption? In Florida, we are a home rule state, and that essentially means that the local government has all the power to do what a government needs to do for the benefit of the public. So we have home rule here, but under the home rule statute, it says that we can pretty much do whatever we need to do to further the public health, safety, and welfare, except for, and then it lists a few things, and I've highlighted the important one, and that's anything that's expressly preempted. Now, even though the statute says expressly preempted, courts have created an implied preemption as well, and that is where there is what they call field preemption. So when the regulations are so comprehensive that there's really not room for any other kind of regulation, courts have held that to be an implied preemption, which would still remove the city's authority to regulate. And then the other one is called conflict preemption. So if the state statutes say you can do something, and then the city comes along and says, no, you can't, that would be a conflict preemption where the city would get in trouble. A lot of people ask me, well, why does it matter? What happens if we do something and we're preempted? And there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, obviously, as an attorney, I can't ethically advise my client to do something that I don't think that they can legally do. But beyond that, what are the what are the real consequences? One of them that we're always worried about is the attorney's fees. So the state has created a whole mechanism for someone who is faced with prosecution or being denied a permit or something like that for something that the city was preempted from. So we're enforcing something that we were preempted from doing. We have to pay for their attorney if we lose. And that can be very expensive. I've been involved with cases where hundreds of thousands of dollars were paid to opposing counsel at the end of the litigation because it was determined that we were preempted from doing what we were trying to do. So that's kind of an overview of where we are. I mean, obviously the city's kind of on the bottom rung of the ladder when it comes to the federal government, the state, the county. We can generally do things, but then the legislature does jump in and tell us that we can't do things. That happens quite a bit. In fact, it's been happening more and more in the last few years. It's been quite a trend in Tallahassee. So specifically on phosphogypsum, the concern would be sort of the regulatory regime type preemption. I'm not taking a position one way or the other there, but that would be something that the legal department would be taking a closer look at if we were directed to do so. And with regard to the fishing,
Could we ask questions before we move on to fishing or?
Yeah, sure.
So the take on this is that this did pass the legislature last year. Is this?
Okay, with phosphogypsum, I have the bill that was passed, and so what it says is essentially it says that the department they're supposed to conduct a study on the suitability of it. And then once they conduct the study, they still have to go to the EPA to get specific approval for use in road construction. A lot of local jurisdictions and local leaders have written letters to the EPA urging the EPA not to allow this to be used. But apart from that, as it stands now, it's not allowed. And regardless of what Florida decides to do, whatever the outcome of this study is, the EPA gets to decide whether or not it's used or not. And they do acknowledge that here, even in the bill. It says that the material in accordance with the conditions of the EPA's approval for the use. So I think the idea was that they would study it further, they would determine whether or not they felt there was an environmental impact from it, and if they think that it's okay and it can be done, then they'll go back to the EPA with that additional research and ask for permission again.
So in the meantime, can we request it's not advisable legally to request a resolution from the city, but we are wild because this has passed. Or, I mean, it's actually, there's not an ordinance.
Well, I think what it is why
It's not
couldn't
law.
we add this as a prohibited item for road construction at this point?
Oh, well, I guess answer that in the way that I can't advise the board. You're a citizen board. I don't want to interfere with your initiative or tell you one way what you can or can't do. If you did want the city to consider an ordinance prohibiting, I think the only issue would be that you're going to, I guess I'll just put this out here too while we're talking about any request that comes from this board that would result in an excess of 8 hours of staff time requires advance approval by the city commission. I'm going to almost guarantee that if this board requests any kind of ordinance, it's probably going to trigger that requirement, and so there comes a question of whether or not it should go to the council first to get the approval for staff to go ahead and further research, drafting an ordinance and then putting it through the process or not.
What about a resolution?
I think for this one, I mean, we're already. Yeah, I mean, once this came up, I mean, I think we already kind of hit the 8 hour mark on this one. So I think if we're going to go any further on this issue, we'll probably have to go to the city commission and get approval to continue to work on it.
So, yeah, I had, like I said, done a lot of this similar research and put together an ordinance that was just what the city already has on the books and added in the phosphogypsum stuff to it from other communities that had also put together prohibitions of the product. But no, I understand we don't want to do something that's not legally feasible. I think we were just looking at it as the city already had an ordinance that restricts the use of certain products in road construction, and we were trying to figure out a way to add this product to that list in that ordinance. And so we didn't think we were trying to reinvent the wheel. We just thought that this was something that makes sense to add to an ordinance that's already on the city books. So that's where we were with our understanding of trying to move this forward. It sounds like there's a difference of opinion from staff on the
No,
feasibility
exactly.
of this.
I advise the staff, and then when things come through to the commission or the city council, then we weigh in at that point. But I'm not here to tell the board, you're a citizen advisory board,
Sure.
You're independent, and you act at your own prerogative. So if you've got something you want the city to consider, then that's your prerogative to.
I'm sorry, I thought it had been sent to legal for review, and that's part of the research process that we were getting this presentation today, was that those ordinances
I'm
were
sorry,
brought
I
to you
wasn't
guys.
aware that there was actually I don't know if I've missed that part of it. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Cassie.
Yeah, I had written
the
it for
ordinance
shark
part of
fishing
it.
and the phosphogypsum, two ordinances that were pulled, like I said, from existing ordinances that the city has already approved, and from other communities that have approved these similar ordinances. So that's why I thought it wasn't going to hit an 8 hours for staff, because it would have been stuff that's already done and just needs official review. And we were trying to get, ensure that something that we do, if it is something we want to do, that when we move it forward to council for their support, that it is something that can be supportive, because it's already kind of been vetted to a certain extent. So I think that's maybe still up in the air in terms of, like I said, the feasibility of what it is that we're trying to do, and it actually occurring. So that was the same thing with the shark fishing, is that we have, as a city, already have shark fishing prohibitions in place, and the ordinance that I had put together just added to that zone that the city already has, on the books. So with that, I'll let you continue the presentation, or if anyone else has another
Can I just ask
comment?
two
Yeah.
legal questions? And excuse me, because this is my first board meeting, so this is the first time I'm seeing this topic come up. Correct me if I'm wrong, the EPA has a ban on this product.
Well, so according to the staff report that was submitted as part of the legislation last year, the EPA does not allow for this to be used in road construction. But like I said, I didn't independently review the regulations that they were cited to when they took that position, but I would think that that's the position of the state and FDOT, is that they can't use it.
So to your knowledge, it is not being used today in road construction in the city of Clearwater.
I can't speak to that. I don't, all I can say is that there is the staff reports saying that it's prohibited legally. Whether or not people are using it, or I can't really
Yeah,
speak to that.
historically, the idea was that while the EPA has prohibited its use, the state last year, and he just showed that, allowed testing of its use. And so that's why we thought that we would do something ahead of the testing, no matter what the test says, that we would not want that product.
That
And
makes sense.
that would be our support for opposing that product.
So the second legal question that I have then is, if the EPA reverts back to allowing it, can the city of Clearwater legally still ban it?
Well, that's where I was saying there could be preemption issues there. I haven't really taken a deep dive into it personally. I think we would need to get council approval to dig into it further. I've just, my gut reaction is I don't think we would be able to tell FDOT what kind of materials that they could use in the construction of their roads. There's a lot of roads within the city limits that we don't control. They're either county or state controlled, and my gut reaction is that there's very little we could do to tell the county and the state what materials they're allowed to use. But I mean, I could research it further, but I think at this point, we would need, the legal department would need direction from the council to do that.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you that there are state roads, and if the state approved it, that it could be used on their roads, but I think specifically the city has its own ordinance for its own roads that allows, what materials, and within those roads, we can still say we don't want that product by contractors. And if we had something on the books, there could be an opportunity, because we are a home rule state, that we would be grandfathered in because of putting something out there ahead of other communities that are maybe not following this as an issue. So again, that's why we wanted to put something out there, was that while it hasn't been approved by the state specifically, they are looking at it as a product, and Mosaic is a huge lobby group throughout the state. And so, not really sure how the dominoes will fall, but that's, the idea was that we wanted to try to get out ahead of something. And like I said, we had an ordinance, the city has one in place that restricts certain materials in road construction, and I thought this would be easy to just kind of piggyback on those other materials. So that's kind of where the idea of it came along, and where we are with you all today. So.
Well, you don't, like I said, you're an independent advisory board, so if someone makes a motion and then you want to report to the council, and that's the prerogative of the board, I'm not here to interfere with that or take a position either way. I just wanted to give you a little bit more information as part of your conversation, and then of course if we serve at the pleasure of the city council, the legal department does, so certainly if they direct us to research or prepare something, we're going to do that.
Okay.
It sounds like if this law, if the EPA does choose to approve this, it will be used for, this law only involves state roads. So if Clearwater did choose to add this to the materials that we ban from our own construction, road construction, then that wouldn't really be in conflict, I wouldn't think. I mean, I know you said you'd have to take a deeper dive into it, and it depends on how that statute would be written at the time, I assume, if it's changed. So there's a lot of ifs there, but it sounds like it could be a worthy thing to still do.
And as far as shark fishing?
Okay, I'll try to be quick because I'm getting a call here. I'm sure it's my wife asking me where I'm supposed to go get the kids. So thank you so much. Just real quickly here. First off, there is a statutory right to hunt and fish in the state of Florida, and what exactly that means, I couldn't tell you. Apart from in my dealings with FWC, they take this very seriously, and they construe all of their regulations in a manner as to try to keep this open and as hunting and fishing friendly as they can. And they feel that they have a legal obligation to do that in my dealings with them. Also, something else to consider is that there is a legislature-initiated constitutional ballot that voters will be voting on this coming election that will take that statutory right to hunt and fish and make it a constitutional right. And what exactly that is going to do for the regulation of hunting and fishing in the state of Florida is anyone's guess. Because once something becomes a constitutional right, it certainly changes the scrutiny that is applied to the regulations that could interfere with that constitutional right. So this is going to create potentially quite a bit of litigation, and lawyers are going to make a lot of money if that passes. because it's going to be very confusing, and I'm not sure exactly what it means and what powers are going to be limited of the government from that. But that's something that's kind of out there, which creates some uncertainty as far as what we could do. We already talked about preemption, and so, express, implied, the regulation of fishing, saltwater fishing, is an express preemption. The state law here says that it's expressly reserved to the state. Now, there's one section there that may be the room for regulation that, and that's certainly where we live as a city, because it says that we can prohibit from real property that's owned by the local government. And so that's where our current ordinance that's on the books, it essentially prohibits fishing from any city property where posted. And then we've got another little bit more detailed ordinance that would apply to freshwater, and then some other parks type areas. But again, the theory would be that this would be only applied to city-owned property. What's city-owned, what's not city-owned, especially when it comes to the beach, can get very complicated. And so that was it. The only thing I wanted to kind of put to your consideration as part of your conversation. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to do or even what you can and can't do. Just trying to give you a little bit of an idea of what the legal department would be looking at if we were directed to prepare an ordinance by the commission or the city council.
Okay, thank you very much, Jared. Yeah, and again, with the shark fishing, I had crafted something based on our existing fishing restrictions, and Indian Shores had recently, well, it was over the last summer, had passed their own prohibition of shark fishing on the beach there because of issues of shark carcasses being left on the beach and other issues of public safety, just kind of bringing in predator fish where people are playing on the beach. And so that community saw fit to create an ordinance to restrict that activity. Is that something that your research has kind of pointed you to at all?
I saw the
Success?
ordinance from, excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no.
The Indian Shores, I believe, had an ordinance that prohibited it on the beach. The only thing I could say is, you saw the preemption statute. That was something that the legal department, we would have to look at whether or not we felt like we fell into that category of city-owned property. I know in my time here so far, Clearwater Beach is, there's a variety of ownership up and down the beach. There's North Beach areas where there's some private property out even into submerged lands, and then there's other areas where the city owns the property in what we would call fee simple on the beach, and then there's other areas where we have we own it by way of a plat dedication, which is not technically a full ownership, but it's something that we hold in the trust in the public trust. So there's a variety of ownership when it comes to the beach. And so our situation may not be the same as some of the other communities that you're looking at, and I would not want to comment on the legality of another city's ordinance either. So
Sure. Yeah, I guess I just bring that up because of just say that if a city has put it out there and it's a nearby community within our same state, that they're kind of playing by the same rules that most other cities within our state and our community would be as well.
Well,
similarity. So
that's part of what the theory of why preemption is useful, is that it's supposed to create a uniformity of regulation across the state. And I do know in the particular news stories about the sharks that were left on the beach, those species of sharks are prohibited from taking under FWC's regulations. So those stories that you read about, those people were breaking the law.
yeah, and again, that's the challenge in shark fishing, is that you don't know what you're pulling up. And so when you have a hammerhead that comes up with a hook in its mouth, which I was sent pictures of that this week as well, how do you go about regulating that when there are illegal activities happening through the use of illegal activity, right? So I think that's why we were trying to overall say this one activity, shark fishing, is luring in, from a public safety aspect, luring in predator fish. And then on top of that, there's a number of endangered sharks that swim off our coast that you don't know if it's going to be a tiger shark, you don't know if it's going to be a hammerhead that you're pulling up. So that's, I think, where, some of, for us as a background, we have prohibitions on fishing in certain parts of the city and in certain areas, and thought we might be able to expand that for the other part of the beach up to where the state park is, where it is banned. So one state agency wants to, promote the use of hunting and fishing, and another state agency doesn't want it happening in their space. So recognize the challenges that we have and you as a, legal authority have to deal with. But anyone else on the board have a question or comment?
Am I correct in assuming we will need council approval to look at this issue as well?
Well, I guess I would say is that I can't, whatever the board, if the board wants to write a policy letter or even, if you've got some materials or whatever that you want, we can't stop you from reporting to council or advocating for whatever you want. But from the staff side, we've got a rule that says that if we're going to exceed 8 hours on an item, then we have to get specific council approval for that.
Sure.
So if the legal department's going to get involved in research and draft an ordinance that we've, put our stamp of approval on, then we'll need direction from the city council for that.
Do you know if, with the designated swimming area on Clearwater Beach, the land, you're saying that there is private property that goes up to the water, not just the water line, or that the city may own but may not, up to the state park in the North Beach? Is what we're asking about,
Well,
right? We're asking about from the swimming
I think you
area.
were talking about a couple different, so the designated swimming area, if I'm correct, is where there are the lifeguard stations, and then after that, it's not the designated swimming area anymore, right?
Right, like from the 880, I call it the 880 building, it's before the 880 building, actually.
And that's
up to where the state park starts. Do you have any ideas, like who owns that land?
I am
If that's city property?
frequently confronted with that question. That's something that I spend a lot of time on, and I don't want to get too far, off, into that. And I just pointed out because the preemption says that we can regulate on city-owned property the
Right.
taking of saltwater fish. That's what the preemption says. And so then it becomes a question of, well, what is city-owned property then? Because that's where the state is saying we can regulate. And it's a very complicated answer to that. And so that's all I wanted to say. I can't really there's a lot, we could spend, that's an 8-hour topic right there.
Really?
We'll
That's
have to-
that big a subject? Interesting, okay.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Chief Gandy.
So, just for clarification, this public bathing beach, anywhere you've got lifeguard towers, so up towards Rockaway. Anything north of that is not going to be a public bathing beach, not going to be covered by swim zones. So it's any of the stuff that we manicure and that we have lifeguards, okay? The other thing, and Jared's absolutely correct in terms of land ownership, we've run into this many, many times. A lot of references to the coastal construction control line and seaward of that. If you think of it in these terms, it might be more helpful. Mean high water mark, your toes are in the wet sand, that's state land. That's state waters. And in theory, if you pass an ordinance to ban shark fishing, someone could stand in state waters and legally fish for sharks. I'm here to speak, simply just listening to Jared, I'll speak to you in terms of the enforcement problem. And what happens is this: the way the ordinances are generally crafted, it restricts you, and some of them will say something to the effect, no chumming. Well, you can't chum now by state statute. You're not allowed to chum for sharks. You can't throw blood in the water off the beach. You can't cut up pieces of fish and toss them in to attract sharks. And then it'll say something to the effect, you can't use lures and tackle consistent with shark fishing. Well, I've been fishing, I'm a Floridian, been fishing all my life, and I used to guide at one point in time, and it would be hard pressed for my officers to come to someone and determine if they're shark fishing or not. Rope, chain, tire, amberjack head, jaws,
Yeah.
that's easily definable. But if they have a large reel, and even wire leader is not indicative solely of shark fishing. So I never like to encourage ordinances that may be unenforceable or exceptionally difficult to enforce. But is there a component of the public that voluntarily complies when they understand they can't engage in the activity? Absolutely. But, it's just one of those issues that I'm very sensitive to, because ultimately it comes back to the police department. Why aren't you doing anything about this? Well, my officers went out. The guy had a 6/0 reel, a heavy fishing rod, and said he was fishing for tarpon. My cops aren't going to be able to distinguish between one and the other. FWC maybe, but I would venture to say probably challenging, and we would just say, hey, if you're shark fishing, you can't do that here. So it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And in terms of arguing for safety, to your point, if I attract large predators in with chum and other things, it's problematic. I will tell you, I'm a frequent diver. They're there all the time. I do have a problem with bringing them in. But if you're merely fishing and someone has 4 rods out, it presents the same safety problem for individuals using the water as it would if you were shark fishing. It's lines in the water, it's hooks, it's leaders, it's things like that. So it's more challenging than affecting an ordinance specifically to shark fishing. I think if you're going to argue for safety as provided for in the statute, then you would probably have to address everything, because hook, line, leader in the water is a hook, line, leader in the water. I haven't seen it here as such a prolific problem that we need to regulate, but there are others who live in the area that differ with that opinion. I look back to see if we had any injuries and things of that nature. We just don't have it. So you have an environmental conservation concern coupled with a safety concern. Environmental conservation concern, the state statute says if it's a restricted species, you can't drag it on the shore and take pictures of it. You've got to release it safely. So, again, you guys are wrestling with a complicated issue, and we're prepared to deal with it and address it through education and things like that, but I don't know that enforcement is going to be the solution to this problem. So hopefully that's helpful.
I appreciate that, Chief Gandy. And just as background, that is for us and to Jared's point too, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is our due diligence to make sure if we want to bring something forward to City Council, it's going to be supported and approved. I don't think we want to just keep spinning our wheels just to do that. We want to make sure that what we're going to do is going to be effective and supported. So, and I could say last year, we had asked about a cigarette ban, and not necessarily saying we wanted to go through with it, but we wanted to ensure that it would be enforceable.
Yeah.
And so we had Deputy Chief Wallach came and told us that it is possible. But and that was, I think, another aspect of this, is we want to ensure that if it's something we can move forward with, that the enforcement arm is going to be able to effectively enforce it. And if that's a challenge, then
I appreciate that, and it's just something to reconcile. We tell our young officers, if you can't make an arrest, don't threaten an arrest, right? So I just want to be careful with that one. And the other thing too, in my experience with my previous boards, certainly you guys come to a consensus that you support something to be sent to council. We don't report it back. Jared doesn't report it back. You can just write a letter to council saying we came to consensus and we'd like you to consider whatever.
Sure.
And then if they direct us to spend 8, 10, 12 hours doing it, then so be it.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Chief. Any other comments,
Yeah,
questions?
I have a question. Chief, you mentioned earlier that suggestive behavior and education could be an effective means to skirt the problems with enforceability.
Sure.
Can that be achieved through signage, suggesting not to fish for sharks in certain areas?
I don't think you would want suggested signage. Suggested signage, prohibitive signage, yes. Suggestive signage, no. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm jaded, but I think we live in the culture society now that's challenged the rules. And again, I don't like establishing rules and signage that I know that it'd be challenging to enforce. But as far as, hey, we'd appreciate it if you don't shark fish, I don't think that would work so well. And again, it's all about, there are going to be folks that challenge you at every turn. There are others, and I use the hunter as an example, they're going to be responsible if they know it's a park that they can't hunt within. They're not going to hunt in there. This one's a little bit different because, as Jared mentioned, this is a complex issue, and the property lines, I mean, I can assure you there's folks that live on the beach that will fish, that they move there so they had access to fish. So, you know, but it comes up, and much like duck hunting, when it occurs and someone leaves a mess out there and leaders and a dead shark and things like that, it gets attention. So, you know, there's some things they have to take a little course and get effectively a shark fishing permit now. It talks about types of gear they have to use and things like that. So and you can't jump. So, you know, those are some helpful things that came from the state, and that's what we check for. Hey, did you guys take the class? Do you have the permit? So that's what we can do now. But, you know, the public, I think, will speak to this, particularly people that live out there, because it's an acute issue for them in some circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have comments.
Yeah, I'd like to open up the comments to anyone from the public. Please come forward, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Samuel Hutkin. I'm the president of the Clearwater Beach Association. Seems to be a lot of minutes. I might need more than 3, so we'll try and work our way. Because I have kids up there too waiting at the library. So there's a lot of context with this. I've been here for 15 years, seen shark fishing happen on the beach. When the regulations came to kind of put a little bit more of a damper with licensure and hooks and chumming, that helped a little bit. I just want to explain, we're talking about 6 to 5 shark fishermen that come on North Clearwater Beach on a consistent basis. 2 live in 880 Regatta Beach Club, and they have a little bit of a following of 4 people. Other than that, the rest of the residents, and why we don't see any issues, are scared when they fish. When they fish, they don't swim, because it is a swim area. It is a private, we'll say, semi-private. There is all sorts of legal questions on lot owner and plat and who owns to the high watermark and everything. And by the way, I thought Margolis was actually looking at this too, because I've spoken to every council member about this, and I know David was supposedly talking about this ordinance and looking at it. So the fact that not a lot of information on this ordinance or the other ordinances used is surprising to me. This has been a hot topic for a while. When we talk about what may happen, it has happened. So there's been a 7-year-old that a shark's got pulled in and lost a leg. So every issue horrible issue that might have happened in the state of Florida. As far as what type of shark, we have what's called a bull shark out there. So a bull shark is one of the most aggressive sharks out there. If you want to research about them, at twilight and at dusk is when they become the most aggressive, because their eyesight changes and they just chomp at anything. A 4-foot dead bull was left in the shallows with a hook. I almost stepped on it. Hooks have been left in the sand. So it is safety concern towards the residents. I know that there's going to be a federal possible statute, but there's a statute of trying to protect people and a safety issue. And this has always been a safety issue. Why we haven't pushed so hard lately is because we're not a public swim area, right? That land is owned by the state and the lot owners, has been said a couple times. And city has no ownership of that. Now, for me, as far as enforcement, I talked to the chief, and I get it. I want to be able to come up with something that's enforceable enough that And even if they have to be pushed to the high water mark or in the water, fine, because it'll be uncomfortable for them, just to give you an idea. I mean, they usually sit in chairs, and that's the other thing. They block a stretch from that wall to that wall, right? With lines coming across. Even our Councilwoman Lena Teixeira was walking one day and almost lost her head because, I mean, to do it right, again, we have good fishermen and we have some that don't do everything, which is blocking the line with a mark. I guess my time's up.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There's
for
a
your
lot more to
comments,
talk
and-
about it.
Yeah, certainly.
Yep.
I think, like we've had some of this discussion today, it is about balancing quality of life for people who live here and the quality of life of the people who want to participate in these activities and trying to strike a balance between there. Do we have anyone else who'd like to come forward and speak? Please, please do.
Gary Athanison, resident of North Clearwater Beach. Born and raised here. I've been fishing, diving, spearfishing for 50 years now. Anyway, I mean, I know I get like, there's probably not much that can be done the way it sounds, but I can tell you that, well, it's not good for sharks. I mean, and I have seen, anyway, the amount of fish is, from what it used to be to what it is now, where people wouldn't believe me if I told you. I mean, anyway, I don't know. Well, anyway, the big thing is, though, these people we're talking about, they take up more space than that sometimes. And they set up these tents and flags, and they just take over the whole area. And anyway, they left us a large stingray with its wings cut off, a shark fin, I don't know how that happened, a big pile of monofilament, I mean like 100-pound test or more monofilament line, just cigarette packs.
Mm-hmm.
And then tourists also would walk by and say, what is, like, how do you let this go on? This kind of, so, anyway.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Okay.
I'm curious, Chief, from what Gary's saying, and I think some of the other, and I've, like I said, photos that I've had where there are carcasses left on the beach, is that enforceable, or the people that, is that something that, I guess, is a crime?
It's not a crime. I mean, if you leave a pile of monofilament there, that's littering, obviously, and we don't want our seabirds and anyone else getting tangled up in a pile of monofilament. So there are things that are enforceable, disorderly conduct, alcohol, littering, things of that nature. But the act of fishing itself, unless they're actively chumming and cutting up the stingray and throwing it in the water and things like that, but generally in shark fishing, they'll take one.
But leaving a large stingray on the beach is all right?
Yeah, I mean, we would, in theory, have to catch the person actually doing it. Who caught it and who threw it up on the beach and left it there. So it becomes an enforcement challenge. I mean, and so here I am today talking about duck hunting and fishing regulations when, we have a city of 130,000 people and 50,000 visitors on the beach. It's not that it's inconsequential. These are quality of life issues. But my suggestion to anybody is if you encounter that, call us while they're there. I mean, if they're there and starting a fire on the beach and piles of monofilament and acting irresponsibly and drinking, anything like that, those are all enforceable. I mean, we're well designed to deal with those types of problems. But as Jared mentioned, I mean, this is a space that's has some conflict and friction points with state statute and the preemptions. And as he referenced, we're talking about designated swim areas.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's very specific. And we have very specific designated swim areas, none of which, the North Beach is not that. Despite the fact that for the residents, that's their designated swim area, it doesn't meet the statutory requirement, in my view.
Sure.
But, like I said, there's friction points here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chief. Jared?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I did just want to make a comment about the ownership of the beach, because I don't want to, I know that can be a can of worms, and so I just want to try to clarify it a little bit more. Whether or not the city owns the beach, or it's privately owned, or how it's owned, is a separate question than whether or not people can access it as a public beach and access the water and that sort of thing. So I did want to make that clear. Just because something may be, there may be a portion of the beach that's, they may have an ownership claim to the mean high water line from a private property standpoint. It's a separate question of whether or not that means that they can actually exclude the public from that beach area, or what that means. It's a very complicated legal area. So I did want to just clarify, just because I'm saying that there may be parts of the beach that are privately owned, I'm not necessarily saying that that means that people aren't allowed to go there or people aren't allowed to fish from those areas. And then even areas where the city may have ownership of it, the level of the city's ownership is different based on how that ownership came into being. And so, and it can be it's a very complicated question. It's something that I've spent many years trying to wrap my head around, and I'm continuously faced with that question all the time as one of the attorneys for the city of Clearwater. So
Certainly, yeah. I know, and we have some residents from North Beach. They are very well versed with the challenges of ownership along the beach, I'm sure. It does sound, though, that there might be some opportunity for residents, if they're walking and come across some of these behaviors, to contact police and maybe apply pressure in another way that makes it a little uncomfortable for the people to continue participating in those behaviors out there. But right now, I don't know, that we can increase or expand that zone from what it sounds like from a legal standpoint, so.
what we feel that we've already prohibited as much as we legally can within the preemption. Now, I could research that further. I would ask for direction from the council if that was what was desired. But we have some rules on the books that prohibit it on city property where posted, and we do have things in place that I think go about as far as we can with the preemption that's on the books. And FWC this is their job to regulate that. So complaints can always be sent to them as well.
Yeah, and again, outside of those aspects of regulation, there's the other rules for outside along the beach, where if they're, smoking or littering or leaving a number of carcasses or things like that, that if it's caught and called in at the appropriate time, there might be an ability to enforce as well.
Good question. You can't fish on the beach as it stands now.
No, you can. There are areas where you can't.
So where are those areas
Those should
defined?
be posted. The chief would be more familiar with that specific than myself.
Yes, it's the area I described earlier, all the swim buoys from.
Where the swim buoys are.
Clearwater Pass, all the way up north to essentially Rockaway, where the lifeguard station's in.
But is there a specific feet or mileage of which you cannot fish from? Or is it kind of just the buoys?
Yeah, the whole area that's designated a swim zone with the swim buoys or the poles, that is where you can't fish.
So you could just go right beyond that and fish right there?
Well,
essentially.
it's from the sand out, so it's too deep. I mean, you'd be up to your neck if you went past the swim buoys. So it's from the dry sand out into those areas. So that's where you would be prohibited from fishing, is where the lifeguards are guarding the beach in the designated swim zone, or what we call in ordinance public bathing beach. It's a little confusing. We talk about public bathing beach, public beach, but the public bathing beach is the manicured area of sand, and it's guarded by the swim buoys and lifeguards.
And legally, it's not possible to have an ordinance that extends X amount of feet past the swim buoys for safety concerns?
So just back up a little bit. There's the state statute that I put up on the board earlier that says that the regulation of taking of saltwater fish is expressly reserved to the state. So that's the state law says that. And then it says, except that the local governments can regulate on their property. And so that's, and, you know, lawyers, we don't like to, you know, kind of answer questions on the fly so much. I like to kind of really dive into something and look up case law and things like that. So I don't know that I can answer your question beyond just telling you what the statute says. It says that we can regulate our property. Outside of that, it's reserved to the state to regulate.
But if we could regulate up to the swim buoys, which would arguably extend past the property, is that correct?
So that's kind of where it kind of opens up the next conversation of what's our property and what's not our property. And that's where I was trying to say is that Clearwater Beach is, there's a variety of ownerships on that sand, and we'd have to look at the specific areas to see whether or not we felt it was city-owned property for purposes of the preemption, or if this designated swim zone area, or there was some other mechanism that we could use to regulate. Maybe there's an interlocal or some kind of memorandum of understanding between our law enforcement and FWC. There may be other ways that we could try to approach the problem. It's a complicated question.
So this will take more than 8 hours?
We're already beyond 8 hours. I just had to highlight that because we've had some shifting and your staff liaison has changed, and so there's been some kind of discussion on the staff side of how we're supposed to support this board, and you know, we want to be responsive, but we also have to follow our rules.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it sounds like there could be some wording between using the high water line or the coastal construction line to this point or something like that, which would, I think, be a demarcation of what a public space is out there, outside of what is privately owned, because I think the coastal construction line pretty much is that delineation point for much of wherever those conflicts may occur in ownership. But again, I think we also have to defer to what the chief says in terms of enforcement, and if it's challenging, we have to figure out how to make it not so much of a challenge and moving forward with something that can not only be accepted by city council, but accepted by police if it's something that has to be enforced. So that's something we'll have to consider if we're moving forward with something on this. So thank you, Jared. If there's any other comments, please. So we did talk about a couple other items here.
Maybe just to retort on ownership, which I'm going to now do some research. We've all never wanted to dig down on the ownership thing for many reasons, but I think it's time to, just for a little bit, to see who owns these lots to what level, and maybe privately, we as a neighborhood can ban it because it's owned. You know, I mean, we have what we're looking at is state and private. The city doesn't really come into play, I don't think, in North Beach to a certain level, from what I'm hearing on certain things. I've heard this for 15 years. So I think we have a bunch of lawyers in the neighborhood. I think we'll dig down into this, and that maybe we can come up with something together where, you know, a merge of some sort of, whether it's ordinance this way and then also private. Because I'm thinking, isn't the beach, which I was going to ask our former council member a little bit more questions on ownership of Indian Rocks Beach, or how that's private, and what the difference is to ours. Again, we have a public swim area, as the chief had said, and that's obvious. We do have a swim area in North Beach. It's right out there. And any offshore, you know, sharking or fishing has caused a problem. Now, we really need to kind of come up with an answer that's going to work for everybody and, again, is going to be enforceable. So I will do some digging legally to figure out these plats and lots and see what we can do. That's what I'll try to do.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Anyone else from the public to talk to about this item? All right. Anyone else from the board? All right. I think we're going to wrap this up then. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item 5, old business items. Thank you, everyone, for coming and speaking on this. Cassie, old business?
Do I need to push? Okay, you can hear me. So I have a list of all of the topic requests that you all have given in the last couple of meetings. So I just wanted to give, I guess we can run through those, and I'm not exactly sure what would classify as old business on them.
Yeah, we can barely hear you.
I can't really hear you.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on, yeah.
I'll just be louder. Okay. So you had all asked for a city hall update, and I've asked our project manager on that, and they've said that they gave a presentation to city council and would recommend you all to watch that presentation, but that they would not have an additional presentation to give to the EAB at this time. And then I know John had also asked for looking into the Tampa Bay Estuary Grant for invasive species application. And unfortunately, we've decided, staff, we don't have the capacity to do that at the moment, which I'll get into our director's report because we have several federal grants going on. And then we had the phosphogypsum and the shark fishing ban, so we've done that today. The EV and solar development code, again, that was done today. You've asked for a marina project update, and we're going to get that next meeting, so that'll be in July. You've asked for an artificial turf code update, and that's going to be potentially in July, depending on any progress. You asked for a city solar project update, which that would be me. Potentially, we'll see what the progress is for July. And then Cooper's Bayou, you also asked, and that would be Sarah Kessler. And she said that the presentation would be very possible in the near future, but she's still developing the final design and everything on that. So potentially July, but potentially the following meeting. And then for Stevenson Creek and Lake Bellevue, Sarah said the same for both of those. Presentation would be possible, but she would need more direction on what exactly you all wanted, because I had just written those, Stevenson Creek and Lake Bellevue. So we'd have to come up with, because I guess there's several aspects to both of those. She'd want some more direction. And then the boat slips on Stevenson Creek, I think maybe one of you emailed that to me, and she said that that's a private development that was approved by the CDB, and so there would be nothing to present on that.
Thank you very much, Cassie. Yeah, I was going to ask about the artificial turf, because that was something that we had asked about for a couple of years now, and then in January, I think the council had a presentation, and I don't think they had made any taken any direction or made any or motion on that. So great if we can hear more about that, and maybe we can take a position on it. And then the marina project, that was something that, again, we've asked because we knew that was in the works, and wanted to have kind of some insight before the project was completed, the planning, and I believe the planning's already completed at this point. I saw the presentation to council, I think, a while ago on that.
Yeah,
and that was something we had asked about just because there were aspects of it that didn't include solar, and we thought that we might be able to add some input for those reasons. So,
yeah, I was told, because initially Jeff, that's the project manager for Marina, he was going to come to our last meeting, but then we were directed that it wouldn't be efficient to have them come to EAB first and then go to City Council, because then if City Council changed it, then we'd have to come back to EAB anyway. So they've said that it should go to City Council first and then come to EAB.
Okay, and that's great if there's still an opportunity to add input at this point. I didn't think that was still possible, so that's great if we're still able to give meaningful input at this point. I think with Lake Bellevue and Stevenson Creek, we've asked just for for Lake Bellevue specifically. I know that's been a couple of years because the residents there had asked for a water management plan for that area, and we were trying to be receptive to those needs. I think for that, we were looking for kind of an overview of the lake itself. I know it's unique in that it's spring-fed, and maybe finding out what that plan is for water quality improvements. And I think that's the same thing with Stevenson Creek, is that that is a water body that has been neglected for decades, and I think there's a lot of changes coming to that area, with plans of removing the Marshall Street plant from kind of putting outfall into that area. And in the past, there was a dredging project that really helped clean up that creek. And I think the city has taken a position to not move forward with more dredging projects. And I think for that specific water body, I'm just curious what the future is, holds for it, and if dredging might be a consideration, because I think that's really the only way to get rid of a lot of that toxic sludge that's been there for too long. So I think if that helps provide some direction for those presentations. And again, I think Cooper's Bayou was another one that we've had an interest in for many years since the city purchased that property, and we're just trying to keep on top of what's going on out there. And earlier today, I think everybody was surprised to find out that even the zoning hasn't occurred for there, and that's a little surprising. So, but other than that, I think, and overall, what are we looking at for Cooper's Bayou? And I think Sarah has a good handle on that. She's shared plans for, changing some of the roads out there to help for washing and flushing out the water, things like that. But great. Thank you for keeping.
Yeah, and I'll just note that I only put 3 agenda items on today's, thinking it would be, an hour and a half, and we're already at 2 hours. So that's, I've already got 4 things potentially for July, not including those.
Yep.
So we'll just have to keep in mind, how many agenda items we put on.
I'm also concerned about, we have said in the past that we would like to be able to comment on construction projects that at 30% planning.
I think it was 60%.
No, it's 30%, yeah.
Okay.
And we've not heard anything about City Hall, which is beyond probably 30% now.
Yeah, it's much better. Yeah, it's past,
Yeah.
it's past that.
And we missed the Marina project, apparently. But,
Yes.
I would love to hear about City Hall, when we can get a chance on our agenda, I realize.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a political one, so that's why they said to just watch.
Are you involved in that planning? Do you have input, or is the Sustainability Department?
Can
Yes.
you send out a link to the presentation that council had on the city halls?
Sure.
Thank you.
That would be great.
But yes, Melody and I, it is something that we're involved in.
I'm sorry?
Melody and I are involved in it.
In that planning?
Yes.
Okay, good. You have input.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Cassie. I didn't have anything else to add to old business, so that's great. The things that I did have, you already had on your list, so thank you very much. We'll go on to our next item, Director's Report. I think this is probably...
Okay. So a couple of things I wanted to mention, but I know we're kind of running out of time, but so I did print out these Article 3, which kind of outlines the appointed authority boards and committees, and we've had some internal discussions. So I think our last official meeting was in January, when we were still up in the air with what department we were going to land in, because we did have to cancel the March meeting. So we're now officially in the Public Works Department. So we've got Marcus here, he's our director. But we've had to, because I'm new to the role, but now we're into a new department, so people are interested in, what exactly the role of the staff liaison is and what the role of the board is. So I was able to find this document, and then the Division 5.1 outlines the Environmental Advisory Board, and if you go down to Section 2.163, the powers and duties, it says the board shall have the following powers and duties: to identify and assess significant environmental objectives, review and provide recommendations to the City Commission on selected environmental programs and projects. So, we've had some discussions about what that means, as far as you all drafting ordinances. So it would appear that perhaps we should just, instead of drafting ordinances, you all should just be writing letters of recommendation or speaking that way instead of drafting the ordinances themselves. So I just wanted to mention that, just because, as we've just heard for the last hour and a half, there's a lot of technical legality things. And so really our legal department should be the one to do so. But other than that, I did want to update you on some of the projects that we have going on. So as you know, we have the vulnerability assessment, which we were hoping to present to you at the last meeting, but we had to change that to a public presentation due to the lack of quorum. But we are wrapping the statewide, state-mandated, city-wide vulnerability assessment. So you can go back and look at the presentation that we did have on that was recorded. But then we will have a final presentation, most likely at City Council in the upcoming months. So we'll look forward to that. And then, like I said, in the old business, we'll be doing an update on our solar projects that we're hoping to have some progress in the next couple of months. They will be coming, at least the first two will be coming to City Council probably in June. And then those grants, I wanted to update you on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant that the city received. So we'll be purchasing some electric vehicles and installing some more EV chargers with those. We're still in the kind of negotiations with all of these grants, so I don't have anything really concrete and final to present yet, but hopefully in the next couple of months we'll have something for you. And then I did want to mention that we did receive the Energy Futures Grant, which is also another federal Department of Energy grant. So that's a $500,000 grant to pursue a electric mobility roadmap. That'll actually be a regional approach, but the city will be leading it. So we've just been awarded this. So I don't know how much you know about federal grants, but they take months and months and months just to negotiate the award package. So, technically we can't, put anything out yet and start spending anything, but I just wanted to let you all know that that was a big win for us. So we're looking forward to getting that regional project underway, and we'll definitely keep you all updated when we have more information on that.
Thank you very much, Cassie. All right, we'll move on to board members to be heard. All right.
I just want to thank everybody for coming and for their time today. First board meeting, I'm diving myself in and getting myself ready. I'm an air quality expert, and I'm chairman of the board for a nonprofit foundation, so I've been around the block a bit, but today was a lot more listening and trying to engage myself. So I just want to thank everybody and appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Glenna?
Let's see. Well, I just got, I've been on hiking vacation for the last 3 weeks, and I got in at midnight last night, so I'm a little brain dead, but trying to get back into the flow of things. We just mentioned the city. I want to just say kudos to Cassie and her department for landing these federal grants and county grants also, and pursuing them and achieving that is just really exciting. And I'm very excited about the solar projects that are coming and whatever we can do to support that. I'm sure that we will. I would just suggest, if this hasn't been done or considered, we have new members now, and I really appreciate the comments that you all have made already. It's a little daunting to be here for that first meeting. It's kind of different from what you expected, I think, sometimes. But also that I think we have a goal of supporting our Green Print 2.0 plan, or whatever's permutations coming. And that, so maybe it would be a good idea to review that for you all, to look that over. The council is going to be hearing about Drew Street tomorrow night, and just from an environmental perspective, just to, that in terms of bicycle paths, I think there's some goals in Green Print about multimodal transportation and bicycle paths. I'm an avid bicyclist, and there's only one east-west bicycle path in this town, and that's on Druid, and it's quite well used. And I mean, it connects the two. We have two good bicycle paths that are north-south. One is the Pinellas Trail, the other is the Duke Energy Ream Wilson Trail. But there's only one trail that connects those two, and unfortunately, it's close to my neighborhood, so I get to use it a lot, primarily recreationally. But but there are like 11% of our population that doesn't own a car. So, and they use these bicycle paths for transportation, for shopping, to get to work. I see folks doing that all the time. So anyway, the Drew Street project, I don't know that's about to come to a decision. I don't necessarily see this body as taking a position on that at this point. But I do think no matter what council decides on that project, that we might want to be advocating for some more of a grid of safe bicycling in this town. I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenna. I agree. We need more transportation options, and Greenprint certainly addresses the need for increased bicycle paths and more transportation options. So, the Drew Street project includes some of that as well.
Would be a second east-west
Yep.
route.
I want to thank our two new board members. Thank you very much. I also want to thank all the applicants who put themselves out there for the selection process as well. I think it showed that there is a lot of interest and engagement from the community to want to be on this board and want to volunteer with the city and help make a difference. I think that's admirable for everyone, and especially you guys who are on here. So thank you for doing that and serving. I want to say thank you, Cassie, for all of the work you do. I appreciate the emails you sent out, and some of the screenshots make it very clear and easy to navigate. Thanks. The research for the board, I will say, I'm very, I understand it immensely. I read it back and forth a couple of years ago, specifically and especially when we were working on trying to realign the board to get it into a more overarching department with the city, and I guess we've kind of devolved since then, or I look forward to being in public works. I don't want to say anything negative about that. I just say that, we work to realign and have a larger place within the advisory board process, and so some of that does include being more active than some of the other advisory boards. We've had a track record of success putting forward resolutions and ordinances. Our city has a straw or single-use plastic prohibition because this board wrote it and put it forward. So I appreciate and accept what staff sees in our board, but I also think that we kind of are a little bit different. We are the only board with an objective, a stated objective, and that means that we have things that we need to accomplish as well with that objective. And so sometimes that might be a little bit different than what other boards put forward. But I think, like I said, we've had tremendous success in the last few years, and look forward to continued success. And thank you for our new membership. And with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.